My name is Mina, and I always say it with a quiet smile, as if checking to see if it's really me, that 36-year-old woman who drives downtown every morning to work as the CFO of a major industrial company, where the air smells of coffee, metal, and negotiations, and the numbers on the screens become something like a soothing mantra. 4 years ago, I finally saved enough money to put a down payment on my own place, and although it wasn't a luxurious mansion or a dream apartment from glossy magazines, just a neat two-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, for me it symbolized that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I had my own place, my own door, which I could lock and know, behind it lies my world. I'm still paying the mortgage, but in every check, in every transfer, I feel a small victory. After all, it's mine, and no one can take it from me. My parents, Linda and Robert, retired 2 years ago. My dad worked his entire life in construction, with chapped hands and a back that always ached by evening from the toil. My mother was a nurse, sensitive, tired, with a soft voice that could calm anyone. Their pensions are modest, and they try not to complain, but I know they struggle without my help, so I send money, pay the utilities, and buy groceries, and I do it without hesitation, as if fate itself had assigned me this role. Well, you've helped us out, my mother says, but I sense the gratitude in her voice, which she tries to hide behind her usual restraint. I have a younger sister, Emma. She's 29, 7 years younger than me, and last year she married Tyler, a guy with a gentle smile and those same eyes that girls have been drowning in since high school, a real charmer. As I always tell my friends, Emma and I have a history of our own. I've been her personal bank ever since I got my first real job out of college. She was still in high school then, constantly needing money for new sneakers, trendy jackets, concert tickets, and all the other things teenagers need to feel like they belong. I didn't mind, big sister debt, right? The only problem is, she never stopped asking. Even after graduating and getting a job at a marketing firm, she kept calling, Mina, I need a new haircut, but only at that expensive salon. Mina, my friends, and I want to go to that new restaurant, but we don't have the money yet. Mina, Tyler and I can't pay our rent this month. And it all sounded so natural that before I knew it, my life had become a long list of transfers and payments: the mortgage, utilities for my parents, money for their groceries, rent for Emma and Tyler, and random requests that popped into my sister's head. Essentially, I was supporting 4 adults and myself. Sometimes the thought would ring louder in my head than I'd like, but I pushed it away, convincing myself I could afford it. My job paid well, I didn't have kids, dating was rare, and what else was I going to spend money on? That's how my days went until 3 months ago, when problems started in our neighborhood. First, there were whispers on neighborhood forums, break-ins, thefts, strange people outside houses. I felt a sense of unease, that quiet, clinging kind that doesn't come right away but grows like a shadow. And one day I called Safeguard Security, a company a colleague recommended. The guy who arrived was attentive, speaking softly and confidently, as if everything was already taken care of. Do you just need the basic features or the full package? He asked. What's in the full package? I asked, crossing my arms. He started listing: cameras all around the perimeter, motion sensors, cameras inside the main zones, everything uploaded to the cloud. You can watch the feed from your phone. Let's go full on, I said, feeling relief roll through my chest. Better safe than sorry. The following week, everything was installed: 8 cameras inside and out, an app on my phone showing every corner of the house. It was actually kind of cool, and I found myself suddenly excited to check that I hadn't left the garage door open or to see when packages had been delivered. I didn't tell my family about it, not for any particular reason, it just hadn't occurred to me. And they rarely visited anyway. Who even sits around and talks about security cameras while eating dinner? About 2 weeks after the installation, on a Tuesday, I came home from work and sensed something was wrong. There was nothing obvious, but the air felt different, as if someone had walked through the rooms and left an invisible trail behind them. My favorite coffee mug wasn't where I'd left it that morning. The cushions on the couch looked like they'd been rearranged. Little things that made me stop in the doorway and listen to the silence. You're paranoid, I whispered to myself, trying to push the thought away. Too many true crime podcasts, but the feeling clung to me like a splinter. I even walked around the house twice, checking the windows, making sure the back door was locked, and still couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my house while I was gone. Everything seemed fine, and I tried to convince myself of this when I returned home that evening, cooked dinner, poured a glass of wine, turned on Netflix, and simply allowed myself to relax, because after that strange night, I deserved peace. Several days passed, and nothing alarming happened, as if the anxiety, the clinging feeling of someone else's presence, was just a figment of my imagination. Fatigue, or a figment of my imagination. At work, I was immersed in quarterly reports, drowning in spreadsheets and graphs until late in the evening, so by the time I got home, I barely had the energy to take off my shoes and make it to bed. The strange feeling of that Tuesday gradually dissolved into routine, the usual calls from my parents, the lazy texts with Emma, and the endless emails from my boss. Everything was going along as usual, until something happened that made me feel again that not everything was as calm as it seemed. 3 weeks had passed since the day I first sensed something was wrong, and our company had a big corporate dinner, informal, with champagne, music, and photographers, where everyone wanted to look a little better than they did on a regular workday. I remembered that silver handbag I'd bought almost a year ago, insanely expensive, but dazzlingly beautiful, from Prada, with a smooth surface that reflected the light like a mirror. I saw it in the shop window and simply couldn't pass it by, and although my mind whispered it was stupid, my heart insisted. I'd only used it once, at my cousin's wedding, and since then it had been stored on the top shelf of the closet, carefully wrapped in a soft cover. I reached there, imagining it glinting in the lamplight, but the shelf was empty. I blinked, wondering if I'd simply misplaced it. I opened the adjacent section of the closet, then went downstairs, checked the guest room, the hallway, even looked under the bed and in the garage where the boxes of old clothes were. Nothing, empty. I rummaged through everything I could until there was just a pile of clothes and dust around it, and I felt my heart pounding, as if I were searching not for my bag, but for something far more important. It was Friday night, and the party was tomorrow, so, almost in despair, I called Emma. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "have I ever lent you my silver clutch? The Prada, you know, the shiny one?" "What? No, of course not," she said, surprised and a little hurt. "Why are you asking?" "I just can't find it anywhere," I said, leaning against the wall. "I thought maybe I lent it to you and then forgot." "Mina," she drawled, "if you'd lent me the Prada bag, I would have remembered, and I would have given it back. I'm not irresponsible." "Okay, fine, sorry," I exhaled, feeling a little foolish. I must have put it in a strange place. "Maybe you threw it out," she added casually. "You did a big cleaning last spring, remember?" And she might have been right. I really did trash it then, clearing out my closets, giving away a bunch of things, and taking some to a shelter. Maybe the bag had just gone the wrong way. I tried to convince myself it was just a stupid mistake. I ended up buying a different bag for the party, but I still felt a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. After all, that silver clutch had cost $800. And I treated it almost fondly, like a small reminder that I could afford something beautiful just for myself. Life went on, a few more weeks passed, and work began to literally consume me. Toward the end of the year, the workload increased, endless reports, meetings, budget reviews. I'd come home at 8 or 9 in the evening, grab a quick bite, and fall asleep with my laptop on my lap. Weekends were reduced to laundry, cleaning, and trying to catch up on sleep. Everything was painfully predictable until one day an incident occurred that threw me off my usual rut again. It happened on a Saturday when I decided to do some cleaning, the kind of real cleaning where you move furniture and vacuum behind the sofa where old receipts and forgotten buttons accumulate. I made my way to my home office and began unpacking the desk drawers, one by one, until I reached the one that held my watch box, the very one my grandparents had given me for my college graduation. It had never been worth much, but for me, it was the most precious gift I'd ever given. Classic Swiss design. Silver dial, leather strap, and, most importantly, a small note from them in which my grandfather had written, "Always be punctual, but never rush." They were both long gone, and this watch was the only thing that still smelled of their home, their kindness, their hands. I opened the drawer. The box was there, but inside was empty. The clock had vanished. I stood over the desk, staring at the empty velvet recess, and for a long time I couldn't believe I was actually seeing it. "No, no, no," I whispered, feeling a chill run through my chest. I pulled out everything in the drawer, checked again, then moved the desk, walked around the office 3 times, opened all the drawers, looked under the furniture. Into other rooms, nothing, the clock had simply vanished. As if it had never existed, and then, for the first time in a long time, I felt not just anxiety, but fear, quiet, sticky, persistent, the kind you can't shake even if you convince yourself everything is fine. I brewed myself some strong coffee, the kind that smells slightly bitter and seems to tear you out of your days, sat down at the kitchen table, and for the first time in a long time, truly thought, not just fleetingly, as usually happens when work tasks and shopping lists are swirling around in your head, but deeply, with that feeling when you suddenly realize everything that's happening is no longer a coincidence. First, there was that strange sensation, as if someone had been in my house, then my purse disappeared, now my watch. One could be chalked up to absent-mindedness, two to coincidence, but three. No, three, that's a pattern. Someone was coming into my house and taking my things, and not just by chance, but with the confidence of someone who knows where they're going. But how? The house is always locked, the alarm is on, I've never given the keys to anyone except my parents, who have a spare set, left with them back 4 years ago when I bought the house and handed it over to them with the words, just in case something happens. If someone had told me back then that this suddenly would turn into such a betrayal, I would have laughed. I almost said to myself, no way, my family wouldn't kidnap me, would they? And something inside me trembled, I mentally dismissed it, but then I remembered the cameras, my cameras, smart, accurate, connected to the cloud, storing footage for 90 days. I opened my laptop, logged into the Safeguard app, and opened the archive. The cursor hovered on the screen, and I felt my heart slow down, as if preparing for a beat. I began scrolling back through the dates, day by day, searching for anything suspicious, even though deep down I already knew I would find it. A few minutes later, my eye caught a marker. 3 days ago, at 2:47 p.m., the motion sensor at the front door had been triggered. I clicked view, a picture appeared on the screen, and I saw 2 people approach the door. One of them pulled out a key, and opened my door. They walked in calmly, unhurriedly, as if they were returning home. I zoomed in, and even before the image became clearer, I already knew who it was. Emma, my little sister, and Tyler, her husband. I froze, my fingers trembled, my breathing became shallow, and it took me a few seconds to force myself not to look away. The timestamp read Wednesday 2:47 p.m. I was sitting in a budget meeting, discussing numbers, laughing with colleagues, unaware that people were walking into my house like a supermarket. They knew I was at work, of course they knew. I watched Emma head straight for my bedroom, without even looking around. Tyler went into the living room, turned on the light, and looked around. Emma opened my closet and started sorting through my clothes, pulling things out, holding them close to herself, looking in the mirror. At some point, she pulled out my sweater, that soft gray turtleneck, and showed it to Tyler. They were talking, laughing, in my bedroom, among my things. I felt my throat tighten, as if someone were squeezing it from the inside. Emma folded the sweater into a bag, then went to my dresser, opened the jewelry box, and began sorting through it, choosing, showing it to Tyler as if it were in a store, and then, carefully, calmly, as if it were her home, she put several pieces of jewelry back in the same bag. I felt sick. I closed my eyes, but after a few seconds, I opened them again and continued watching. I rewound. 2 weeks ago, another visit, this time they were longer, about 40 minutes. Emma was looking around my home office, and Tyler went into the garage. I watched her open a desk drawer, take out the same watch box, open it, and pick it up. She looked at it, then she called Tyler over. He came over, examined it, nods, and she put the watch back in her purse. I continued scrolling, and saw a recording from 3 weeks earlier, that very day when I first felt someone was in my house. The footage lasted over an hour. Emma was opening bathroom cabinets, rummaging through kitchen drawers, even poking around in the laundry room. She took a bottle of my perfume, some makeup, a pair of sneakers I hardly wore, everything, calmly, without a hint of embarrassment. I scrolled back even further and found a recording from 6 weeks ago. Emma was standing in front of the mirror in my bedroom, trying on that same silver clutch, turning around, posing, and Tyler, sitting on the bed, gave her a thumbs up. They both laughed, and a few seconds later, the purse disappeared into her bag. I sat in silence, clutching a mug of coffee, and felt everything inside me crumble. How long had this been going on? How many times had they come by while I was unaware? I rewound the archive to the earliest available recordings. The cameras were installed 8 weeks ago, and they started arriving within a week, maybe even earlier. Maybe it's been going on all this time. I opened Excel. Yeah, it's funny, even here the CFO uses spreadsheets, but I had to organize everything, otherwise I'd go crazy. I created a document and called it entries. In the first column, I wrote date, in the second, time, in the third, what was taken. My hands were still shaking as I typed in the lines. 6 weeks ago, silver bag, 3 weeks ago, watch, 3 days ago, jewelry and clothing. And the more I wrote, the more despair grew within me, not despair, but a cold, clear determination. By the time I closed the spreadsheet and put my laptop down, I had 12 separate incidents, some small, some not so small, jewelry, clothes, electronics, even a couple of bottles of good wine that had been sitting on my kitchen counter, had vanished without a trace, and when I added it all up, the sum turned out to be at least $10,000, maybe much more, and in that moment, as I looked at the numbers, it suddenly seemed to me that I was losing not only things, but also a part of myself, a quiet and unique part that couldn't be counted in the expenses column. I texted Emma, "Hey, can you and Tyler come over for dinner tomorrow night? I'm just trying to catch up," and though my voice trembled with accusation, I kept it even, because I was more interested in seeing them face to face than through a screen. They arrived on time. Tyler was holding a grocery store chocolate cake, which looked so ridiculous I wanted to laugh and slam my fist on the table at the same time. Emma hugged me as if none of those cloud-based posts were between us, and we sat down at the table. I made some simple pasta, nothing fancy, and I watched them the whole time, catching in their movements that easy, smug confidence of someone who thinks they're entitled to anything. Halfway through dinner, Emma's gaze lingered on my new laptop bag by the door, and in that moment, something in my chest finally snapped. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Some of my things are missing," I said, looking straight at them, noticing the silent changes in their expressions. Emma froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, and Tyler suddenly became interested in his wine glass, swirling the liquid around as if that would steer the conversation away. "What exactly?" she asked finally, the slight pause in her voice almost seeming sincere to me, and I named the things: my silver purse, my grandmother's watch, and a few other things. Her face turned pale at first, then she seemed to catch her breath and said heavily, "Oh, Mina, you always misplace things. Remember how you thought you'd lost your car keys, but they were in the refrigerator?" As if that should close the subject, as if a fond memory of a stupid mistake 20 years ago could cover the traces of weeks of betrayal. I clenched my fist and slammed it on the table. The sound echoed through the room, making them jump. "I know it was you," I choked out, unable to bear the silence, feeling every cell of my skin tremble with determination and pain. "I know you came here and took my things." Emma's face turned purple, first with embarrassment, then with rage. "What? This is insane. How dare you accuse us of stealing?" Her voice trembled. Tyler laughed, and his laughter was like a cold wind. "Do you have any evidence? Because that's a serious accusation made without evidence," and his smugness rang with the very contempt you and I women know firsthand, when your word is thrown aside without substantiation. I was tempted to throw wine in his face, but I resisted the urge and said firmly, "Give me back everything you have, or I'll call the police." They exchanged glances and burst out laughing, as if I'd told a joke. "Are you going to call the police, sister?" Emma sneered. "Please, you wouldn't," Tyler added calmly, almost didactically. "What if we took some of our stuff? You can afford it. You should offer us more money anyway. You know, we're in trouble. I got fired 2 months ago, you got fired 2 months ago, and you didn't tell me. Why would we do that?" He sounded like he was shifting the blame, making me feel guilty for simply buying myself nice things. Emma, now with obvious mockery, added, "So you're lecturing us about responsibility?" And in her tone, I heard the old habit of devaluing her older sister. They talked and laughed, demonstrating the very legitimization that so often hides behind those who take what belongs to others, thinking that kinship is a shield. "Oh, come on, it's not stealing, we're family, what's yours is mine, right?" "That's how family works," I said quietly, almost whispering, because the phrase conveyed all the emptiness of our relationship. Then, when my voice grew firmer, I said curtly, "Get out of my house." They left, still laughing, and 5 minutes later, Tyler called, admonishing me to calm down and stop overreacting. I heard in his words not only command but also contempt. As soon as they closed the door behind them, I called my mom because I needed support, a voice that would say, "You're right, let's call the police," but the conversation went differently. "Mom, Emma and Tyler are stealing from me. They come into my house when I'm not there and take my things," I said, and there was silence on the other end of the line, and then my mother's voice turned cold and hard. "You won't involve the police in family matters. Your sister earns less than you buy all these expensive things and put them on display. Can you blame her for giving in to temptation? Are you seriously defending theft right now? If you go to the police, your father and I will completely cut you off, no contact, is that what you want?" And she hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand, stunned and confused, because my mother had just threatened to disown me for wanting to report a crime, and in that moment it became clear to me that I hadn't just lost things, I was facing a rift that could destroy everything I had left of my family. The next hour passed in an almost mechanical trance. I sat in front of the screen, stitching together the camera footage into one long, relentlessly honest video, where every movement, every step of Emma and Tyler was captured so clearly that there was no chance of justification. I edited frame by frame, barely holding my breath, watching them enter my house, open doors, rummage through closets, laugh, carry out bags full of my things. With each new fragment, a strange, cold calm grew within me. As if in this digital chronicle I had finally regained control over what they had stolen from me, not the things, but the feeling of safety. When the video was finished, I pressed send and forwarded it to Emma, Tyler, and my parents, adding a short message: "Return everything or pay me $10,000 for what was stolen. You have 1 week, or I'll go to the police." Within seconds, my phone exploded with calls and messages. I didn't answer a single one, my fingers trembled, but I didn't want to hear any more excuses, tears, or lies. The first message was from Emma: "You filmed me without permission, it's illegal, I'm going to sue you." I reread it 3 times and caught myself laughing, quietly, dryly, almost silently. My mother's messages were worse, long, saturated with that special sense of guilt she always knew how to evoke. She wrote about loyalty, about how I was betraying the family, how I would destroy everything they had built. My father sent one short message: "I am very disappointed in you," and for some reason, it was this that cut the deepest, as if my whole life had been reduced to those 4 words, in which there was no attempt to understand, only a condemnation. The next morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, a locksmith arrived at the house, a man with a tired face and kind eyes. He asked no questions, simply did his job. 3 hours and $600 later, all the locks in the house were changed. This time, I didn't leave spare keys with anyone, not Emma, not my parents, not my friends. I locked the door, checked twice, and for the first time in a long time, allowed myself to breathe calmly. But the phone wouldn't stop ringing, the messages kept coming all week, a never-ending stream of poison. Emma vacillated between anger and self-pity. One moment she'd write, "How can you do this to your family? I'm your little sister, doesn't that mean anything?" And then immediately resort to insults: "You pathetic witch, you're filming people illegally." Each message sounded like an attempt to break through my defenses, to return me to my old role, perpetually guilty, perpetually too cold, too proper, but I wasn't going to play the game anymore. My mother's letters grew increasingly angry. She blamed me for the destruction of the family, wrote that my father couldn't sleep at night because of my selfishness, that they hadn't raised me to be so cruel. I read them without tears, only with a growing sense of weariness, as if I were drowning in a viscous quagmire where the truth no longer mattered, and all that mattered was maintaining a semblance of calm. On Wednesday, Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, called. Her voice was cautious, almost gentle. "Mina, dear, your mother said you're having some kind of breakdown and threatening Emma with the police. What's going on?" I answered calmly, "Emma stole from me, Pat. I have a video." There was a brief pause, and then she laughed, quietly, condescendingly. "Oh, Mina, that's ridiculous. Emma wouldn't steal. You must be mistaken." I didn't argue, I simply hung up. There's no point in trying to prove anything to someone who's already decided what to believe. Thursday passed in silence, no calls, except for a couple more nasty messages from Emma and a long letter from my mother, in which she wrote that I was mentally unstable and needed help. That evening, I caught myself thinking that I hadn't felt loneliness as acutely as I did now for a long time. not from the absence of people, but from the realization that those you considered your own have become strangers. Friday morning, day 7, no money, no returned items, just a short message from Emma, "You're bluffing, you'll never call the police on your family." I reread it, and suddenly everything inside me turned over. Fear gave way to determination. At lunchtime, I grabbed my bag and went to the police station. The officer at the desk, a young man named Martinez, listened attentively, without interrupting. His face remained calm, but his eyes said he understood more than he was letting on. I showed him the video on my phone. He watched it silently, then nodded. "That's pretty compelling evidence. Do you know where the stolen items might be now?" "Probably in their apartment or my parents' house," I replied. He wrote down the addresses, said he'd send officers, and explained that if the items were found, I'd need to identify them. I thanked him and returned to work, feeling a strange, heavy relief welling up inside me. That evening, around 6, I was chopping vegetables for dinner when someone started pounding furiously on the door. My father's voice was low, filled with anger. "Mina, open the door right now." I froze, then I heard my mother crying, "Mina, please. They arrested Emma and Tyler. How could you?" I stood on the other side of the door, clutching the knife, but not out of fear, but out of disbelief at how far things had gone. "They're thieves," I said quietly, almost calmly. "They're arresting thieves." "She's your sister," my mother screamed, and I responded, "And it was supposed to mean something to her when she robbed me?" My father screamed that I was cruel, that I was being inhumane. I responded, "If you want them to go free, give me back the $10,000. That's not cruelty, that's justice." He barked, "That's extortion." "No, that's restitution, your choice," I replied and turned away. They shouted for another 10 minutes, then finally left, and I stood in silence, feeling how the house, which had seemed so empty, suddenly became mine, truly mine for the first time. A couple of hours after the shouting at the door died down and I finally allowed myself to breathe a little, my phone suddenly vibrated on the kitchen table. I glanced at the screen and at first didn't even understand what the numbers meant. A transfer notification, $10,000, exactly the amount I'd mentioned. The money came from my parents' account. I sat there for a long time, staring at the message, feeling a strange mixture of relief and bitterness, as if those numbers on the screen symbolized not just compensation for the damage, but the price at which my last illusions had finally collapsed. The next morning, Saturday, I went to the police station. The air was cold and clear, and it felt like I was breathing for the first time in a long time. I went inside and told Officer Martinez I wanted to drop the complaint. He raised an eyebrow in surprise and asked, "Are you sure?" I nodded, "Yes, the charges can be dropped." He thanked me and informed me that Emma and Tyler would be released soon. There was no judgment in his voice, only the slight weariness of someone who had seen too many family dramas end the same way. When I returned home, the house was filled with a silence that didn't oppress, but rather embraced. I sat down at my laptop and did what I'd been thinking about all week. I canceled everything: automatic transfers to pay my parents' bills, canceled; monthly grocery allowance, canceled; Emma and Tyler's rent, canceled. I watched the lines on the screen disappear, one by one, and with each new cancellation, it was as if I were erasing an invisible chain that had held me for years. Then I opened my phone, deleted all their contacts, and blocked the numbers, email, social media, everything. Complete, absolute radio silence. The silence that had once been frightening now seemed almost sacred. 2 weeks passed. That morning, the phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but then I picked it up. Aunt Patricia's voice was unexpectedly soft, almost apologetic. "Mina, I owe you an apology." I remained silent, waiting for what would happen next. "Emma and Tyler moved in with your parents. They couldn't pay the rent anymore. Yesterday, your mother finally told me the whole story and showed me the video you sent. I can't believe they actually did that." Her voice trembled, and I imagined her sitting in her kitchen, sipping coffee, staring at the table where she'd been trying to convince herself this couldn't happen in our family. "Oh, and that's not all," she continued. "My daughter Rachel remembered that her gold bracelet disappeared after Emma visited her last year, and Tom, your uncle, says tools have been missing from his garage since Tyler helped him with some project. So I guess I'm not the only one." She sighed. "Nobody wants them in their house anymore. Your parents are protective of Emma, but that's made the family distant. They're pretty isolated right now." I listened silently, with a strange emptiness inside. Finally, my aunt said, "Your mom's been asking about you. She says Emma's looking for work but can't find anything. They're having a hard time without your help." I exhaled. "It's not my problem anymore." A pause, then she said quietly, "I understand. I just thought you should know." After she hung up, I leaned back in my chair and sat for a long time in the dim light, looking out the window where the wind blew dry leaves across the yard. Did I feel guilty? Maybe a little, but most of all, freedom. For years, I provided for 4 adults who were more than capable of taking care of themselves but chose to live off me. I allowed them to be irresponsible, and they grew so accustomed to it that they began to consider it their right. The theft wasn't about money or things, it was about respect, the lack of it. They didn't respect me, my work, or my kindness. To them, I wasn't a person, but an endless resource, a bank from which they could take without saying thank you. At that moment, the phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Mina, my mother's voice, and it was immediately clear she was calling from someone else's phone. I didn't say a word, just hung up. Something in my chest fluttered painfully, but I didn't regret it. She didn't understand. None of them understood. It had never been about money, things, or even the theft itself. It was all about finally seeing the truth about the family for whom I'd spent so many years trying, working, enduring, and justifying. They saw me as nothing more than a wallet on legs, and now that wallet is closed forever. 3 months have passed since I cut them off, 3 quiet, peaceful months without calls, without drama, without the constant feeling that I owed someone something. At first, I caught myself waiting for the moment to break down, to write to them again, to offer help, because that's how it always was. Sometimes, sitting in a cafe, I'd watch families laughing at the neighboring tables, and something inside me would sink. I'd catch myself thinking, maybe I'm too harsh? Maybe I should have given them another chance? But then I'd remember that evening, Emma sitting at my table, eating the dinner I'd cooked, and laughing as I tried to figure out where my things were disappearing to. I remembered Tyler's smug voice saying, "You should have just given them more money, Mina, then there wouldn't have been any problems." And I remembered how my mother defended them, justifying their theft by saying Emma earned less than me. Then I understood, no, I wasn't cruel, I just finally stopped being convenient. After that, the guilt, that viscous, sticky feeling that haunted me even at night when I lay staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd gone too far, it suddenly disappeared. Not right away, no, it burned out slowly, like a candle that smolders for a long time and then goes out, leaving behind only a faint trace of soot on the glass of my soul. Now I woke up calmly, without the usual lump in my chest. Only sometimes, in the mornings, in the kitchen where that very wine rack stood, I caught myself thinking that this was where all the destruction had begun, with an empty bottle, which I had initially mistaken for absent-mindedness, but now it no longer mattered. The only link I had to what was going on with them was Aunt Patricia. She called every few weeks, not because I asked, but because, as she said, you have to tell the truth to someone, and I, no matter how much I pretended not to care, listened. Emma got a job at a call center, she said one evening. She works part-time, makes pennies. Tyler's still unemployed, they're all living with your parents, and, you know, that creates problems. I grinned, looking out the window where the wind was tearing the last leaves from the maple tree. Good for them, I said calmly. Maybe they'll finally understand what it's like to work for what you want. Patricia paused, then quietly added, "Your mom works now too, as a cashier, at the grocery store, and your dad works wherever he can, as a laborer. They're in their 70s, after all." I was silent for a long time, feeling something stirring inside me, not pity, but rather weariness with this whole cycle. They chose this, Pat. They paid $10,000 to cover for Emma instead of letting her face the consequences, and now they have to live with it. Patricia exhaled heavily. "I know it's none of my business, Mina, but don't you think enough time has passed? They're fighting, maybe you could at least call?" I laughed, not from amusement, but from bitterness. "Pat, I supported them for years, I paid their bills, their groceries, their rent, and how did it all end? They robbed me, and then convinced everyone I was crazy. This isn't fighting, this is the consequences." She sighed. "I understand they behaved terribly, but still, they're family." I replied calmly. "I'm family too, but I didn't steal from anyone and I didn't lie." A couple of weeks later, I received a letter, a real letter, not an email, a white envelope, my address written in a familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter from Emma. Mina, I'm sorry, it began. I know what we did was wrong. Tyler convinced me you had so much that you wouldn't even notice. I envied your beautiful things, your house, your life. But that's no excuse. I'm working now, trying to pay mom and dad back for the money they sent you. It will take years, but I'm doing what I can. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry, Emma. I reread the letter 3 times, and each time I caught myself feeling the same thing, something remorseful, and something not. She wrote that she was sorry, but between the lines I heard excuses. Tyler convinced me, I was jealous, you have so much. It all sounded like an attempt to explain why it happened, not an admission of guilt, not a word about how she lied to my face, laughed when I tried to talk to her like a human being, accused me of madness, not a word about how I had lost not things, but trust, and nowhere, not the slightest offer to meet, to talk, to start over. The letter didn't apologize, it simply stated, I'm trying, but now I live with the consequences. I carefully folded it back into the envelope and tossed it in the trash. The paper fell to the bottom with a soft rustle, and there was something final in that sound. Something strange happened yesterday. I was at work when security called. Miss Mina, you have a visitor. She says she's your mother. My chest tightened. Tell her I can't see her. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. She says she'll wait. Let her wait. I'm not coming out. An hour later, she's still here. She said she has something for you. I almost gave in. Almost. If she's not gone in 10 minutes, call the police. Trespassing. Security nodded. That evening, when I returned home, there was a box by the door, no note, no name, just carefully left on the threshold. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately, not in the letter, but in the way it was packaged, each item wrapped in thin fabric, tied with a ribbon. Inside were my things, a silver purse, my grandmother's watch, a few pieces of jewelry, probably a quarter of what they took. I held them in my hands and didn't know what I was feeling. It was like reclaiming a piece of the past, but also bringing back the pain. Something, maybe, still remains somewhere, but that wasn't what mattered, not things. Things can be bought, replaced, forgotten. I don't want them back. I mean the watch, yes, I want that. It smells like her, like my grandmother, but that's not the point anymore. I want recognition, real recognition, not the kind that sounds like we're sorry you're upset or we're sorry, but you're richer. I want them to say, we're sorry we betrayed your trust, that we robbed you and then called you crazy, that we chose lies and theft over honesty, but I know I'll never hear that. They're simply incapable of it. In their eyes, I was still the villain of my own family, a cold, callous woman who, despite having everything, abandoned those who raised her, and a sister who merely stumbled. In their story, I was the ungrateful daughter and the selfish sister who decided to cut off contact because of a misunderstanding. They still saw themselves as victims, people who had been dealt a difficult fate, not the authors of their own decisions, and this realization, strangely enough, no longer caused me any anger or pain, only a quiet, calm understanding that I was finally no longer part of their scenario. My therapist says I'm doing well. Yes, I started therapy, not because I couldn't cope, but because I was tired of carrying so many unspoken words and unshed tears. At our first session, I sat across from a woman with a soft voice and clear eyes. And when she asked why I had come, I said, unexpectedly, I want to understand why I allowed myself to be used for so long. She listened for a long time without interrupting, and then said, you were that child who was raised like an adult, always responsible, always caring, always the one who had to. I nodded, feeling something click somewhere inside me. And Emma was a baby, right? She asked. I smiled softly. Exactly, she nodded. And that dynamic hasn't disappeared, even as you both grew up. But now, Mina, you're learning to set boundaries. You're learning that love isn't permission to hurt you. You're learning that your value isn't in what you can give, but in who you are. These words stuck with me like tiny seeds that take time to sprout but eventually become roots. It wasn't easy. There were days when I just wanted to pick up the phone, dial mom, and hear her voice, especially on those evenings when it started to rain outside and I'd make tea and remember Emma and I riding our bikes down the street, mom standing at the gate and waving, or dad sitting next to me, helping me with algebra, patiently explaining until I began to understand. These memories, warm, kind, almost physical, made my heart tremble. But then I remembered something else too, how they didn't choose me when the time came, when they had to decide who was right, the daughter who told the truth, or the one who stole and lied. They chose the liar. When they had to choose between responsibility and indulgence, they chose indulgence. When they had to choose between honesty and delusion, they chose delusion. And I made a choice, too. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. My house is quiet now, as if it's breathing for the first time in years. There are no unexpected visits, no annoying phone calls, no bustle, no rustling of strangers' hands in my drawers. I've changed my emergency contact. It's now Jessica, my neighbor and friend. I'm dating a new man. His name is Marcus. He's that rare man who pays for dinner not because he wants to show off, but because he thinks it's the right thing to do. He hasn't asked me for anything, no help, no money, no involvement in someone else's drama. He's simply present, listening, laughing when I tell him about the time I once set a tea towel on fire while trying to learn how to flambe. On our last date, he looked at me over his glass of wine and said, "You don't talk about your family much." I sighed, looked away, and replied, "There's nothing much to say, we're estranged, it's just life." He didn't ask for more, just nodded and took my hand. And for the first time, I understood how wonderful it is when you're not forced to explain yourself, not asked to justify yourself, not appealed to a sense of duty. This is peace. This is my life now, simple, smooth, filled with little things that once seemed unimportant. I work, see friends, laugh when Jessica talks about her grandchildren, go to therapy, sometimes go to the ocean just to sit and listen to the sea breathe. I live in a house to which no one but me has keys. It's quieter than before, but also more honest. Sometimes I ask myself, do I regret going to the police? And every time, the answer is no. It was the wake-up call that needed to be made, otherwise, nothing would have changed. Do I regret cutting them off from me? Perhaps sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, when loneliness weighs a little heavier on my shoulders, but then the morning comes, sunny, simple, and I remember, better to be alone than to allow myself to be used again. Patricia recently told me that my mother keeps telling everyone that I'll soon come to my senses and forgive them. Like always, I smiled. She's wrong, that old Mina would really come. The one who always paid for everyone, tried to save everyone, took the blows and kept quiet. But she's gone. She left because otherwise I would have simply disappeared along with her. That Mina died so I could be reborn, the one who knows how to say no, who knows her own worth, who demands respect, and isn't afraid of loneliness. I don't need their apologies anymore. I don't need their recognition. I don't need anything that smells of pity. For the first time in all these years, I feel light. For the first time, I'm free, and I know for sure, I'm not going back.